This conference's theme of wood manufacturing matters, exclamation mark, especially in the regions, is one that stakeholders and leaders across our city understands very well, carefully balancing the strengths and challenges of both the city and the regions.
This is the first WPMA national gathering. Consequence really, and has evolved from the developments and the priorities that were set several years ago by the board, which was basically targeted to prioritise regional communication and regional development, regional understanding of what our industry was, what our industry needs, and how our industry might go forward. And that was particularly noting that the diversity of the regions and the importance of the industry in the regions was there. We took this approach prior to the formation of the present government, and happily our regional view has married well with a government prioritising regional economic growth.
Wood manufacturing matters, that's why you're all here today. In fact, all manufacturing matters, which is why we've got representatives right across the broad New Zealand manufacturing sector. The ability to add value in New Zealand will help us achieve our environmental, economic and social goals. So wood manufacturing and manufacturing as a whole is really, really important. WPMA has been on a journey around highlighting why manufacturing is important. In 2016, the Wood Council of New Zealand put out a report looking at what we're competing against as a wood industry with the rest of the world. And it was quite revealing because we couldn't work out, log prices were really high. How come our competitors were paying these huge prices for logs and being able to manufacture products and sell them competitively in the world, and we couldn't do the same thing? What was going on? This seminal report, published in March 2016, said, look deeper, look really deep into what these countries are doing to support their manufacturing. Not just their wood manufacturing, they support wood manufacturing because wood manufacturing matters to them, but they support much broader manufacturing. And it's important that New Zealand recognises that, because I think as a country we've kind of forgotten manufacturing. We like farming. We've rediscovered forestry, Peter. And we really like that high-tech stuff, which we really haven't quite got to yet. There's this big manufacturing sector that is yielding for the economy, but is actually getting smaller. And I hope the Minister this afternoon is going to start talking to us about how manufacturing can be better targeted. Friends, it seems to us over the last 30-odd years that whilst we've been fully embracing the mantra of the free market economy, our free trade partners around the world have been doing everything but that. They've actually been shifting the touch lines, they've been widening the posts, and they've actually been bending the rules. And as Winston Peters said through the quote that Doug read out there, fighting those rules and making sure they work for us is really all New Zealand has in order to actually make the difference for our country and for manufacturing. So that's really what the conference is about today, is how do we start to reverse that view that manufacturing is a declining industry and goodbye, and we just become a completely different economy. It's not going to happen. Everything shows that manufacturing grows everything. We've got some great speakers talking about that today.
So in relation to all of those points, I've directed them more towards what you can do in order to improve the outcomes in domestic log markets, and I've therefore directed it more towards what I understand is going on at the buying end of that market. But you need to bear in mind that it also applies to you as well. So everything that I've said in relation to price fixing between buyers, that applies to you insofar as, you know, if you imagine two mills in a region together, if they got together and said this is the price that we are going to pay for logs and no more, that sort of thing, you just need to keep an eye on it yourself.
We often hear about tariff escalation as well, which is, of course, a piece of jargon, but I will try and explain it. That's just referring to the fact that many countries impose tariffs on manufactured imports that are much higher than the tariffs on raw exports. Raw products. So along the bottom is the applied tariffs on logs from a number of WTO members, and up the vertical axis is the applied tariffs on lumber. And you can see tariff escalation is there. Most of the tariffs are higher on lumber than they are on logs. So that's clearly an indication that our overseas markets make it harder to import processed wood than it does raw logs. So that's starting to add to the challenges that you might be starting to face. So again, there's an indication that there's something going on in these markets which is preventing New Zealand from exporting a huge amount of processed wood. As I say, we haven't quite finalised the contract with MFAT, but just sort of manage expectations. This is going to be a fairly technical report. It's a whole lot of number crunching and trying to explain what the numbers tell us. We're going to torture it until it screams. We're not then going to go into the what could you do about it if we identify certain trade distortions. That is really a conversation that can be had between your association's members and leaders and officials and ministers.
I mean, the reality is the log process, and this talks about the whole value chain. This is a big industry, and it's a really important industry, and I'm sure most of you know that. You've got about 6.3 billion, and these figures, incidentally, are 2018 numbers. 6.3 billion, most of that comes out of logs. Some of it's processed wood, and it's a big contributor to the economy. So I refer to it as net output, which contribution to gross domestic product, which essentially is sales minus cost of sales, or gross output minus intermediate consumption, but that gets really technical. And it amounts to about 3.6 billion, 1.7% of GDP, which is significant for any industry in New Zealand. So it's big. If I remember correctly, exports were basically the fourth largest export commodity. We can sometimes pick up a little bit on the currency, especially if it weakens, but essentially that effectively is my central point. How do you fix that? Well, you've got to invest. You've got to have economies of scale. You've got to push volume over fixed infrastructure or fixed cost, but that requires huge investment. It also requires some consolidation, and I do know there has been quite a bit of consolidation in the sawmilling, but more needs to be had, and possibly some clustering of activity to make sure that basically the processing activity is close to the source of the material, which I know in a lot of cases it is, but there are agglomeration benefits to be had and linkages into the ports, because really at the end of the day, for wood processors, it's all going to be about exports, because the local market is only going to provide so much growth, and that's about it.
So staying ahead of what your consumers want is really important as well. I think the other thing that we've found too is that, and I guess that's why nourishment made beautifully we think is so important to not be dairy made beautifully, is that the market set changes as well. All of a sudden you have people who are equally happy one day to have a soy latte, double shot, whatever it comes with, and the next day a full cream latte because that's what they feel like. We call them flexitarians, and it's not unusual to go into somebody's pantry or kitchen and see that somebody's going to have almond milk and full cream milk and full fat butter sitting in their fridge, and they're going to choose in terms of what they do during the day. So we need to understand that the competitive set for us is not dairy. The competitive set is share of stomach. It's what people are eating and drinking, and we really need to reframe what is our competition and what are our points around that. And I would argue for any industry that's a critical thing to do, is really understand what is your true competitive set. We have those 4 areas that we've tried to differentiate on. And hopefully those 4 case studies have given you a view as to how we've tackled our market and some of the challenges. So sometimes it has to be that real micro analysis, and sometimes it's a bigger macro thing that's affecting the whole marketplace, like water. Sometimes it's IP that we develop or borrow and develop. But I would say in all of those instances, what we've done is understand what our consumers want, how that translates into a sale with our customers, and how we can leverage that for our best margin. So thank you very much.
You hear a lot of things, and the slots consultants will tell you about a smart factory and what they can do and everything, and they're great. Guess what? Generally, we can't afford it. So we've got to work out how to do it in a Kiwi way. Some of the things is you've got to be able to look at what you're doing, what your suppliers are doing, how do you gain the information, how you can squeeze every little piece out of that, how you can use automation to reduce your costs but not over the top. How do you use big data, which is a great thing. And big data in my terms in manufacturing is if I have a sensor that's running on a piece of machinery. I want it to be telling me what is happening every second, not what is happening every 25 minutes. Those seconds of data just absolutely grow exponentially, and I don't want to own a server farm to try and collect that. That's just too expensive.
So that is one of the things that has helped us succeed, is that vertical integration. And it takes a long time to accumulate one's competitive advantage when you're manufacturing. Some things you can just go out and buy a machine that's instantly going to do it for you. That's not the case for us. I don't believe it's the case in many businesses really. It takes a long time to get good at what you do, a long, long time.